Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second episode of our 2024 Digital Government Excellence Symposium, which is a series of discussions with some of the most forward-thinking technology leaders in both state and local government. The symposium is designed to provide real-world insights into how digital transformation is shaping the future of government services. I'm Michelle Hanley, co-producer of this virtual event here at PayIt, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. To tee up today's discussion, let me remind those of you who may have missed the first episode that aired live last week, it is now available on demand. In that episode, we started this conversation assessing the state of digital government services today and introduced the concept of Digital Government 2.0, a resident-centric experience which goes way beyond providing services on the web, which could be considered the 1.0 version. Today, we will discuss what it takes to make the move from 1.0 to 2.0 and manage this change in your organization and in your communities. Today's session will be led by Nadia Davis, co-producer of this symposium, who got a chance to interview Jonathan Feldman, the CIO of Wake County, North Carolina, on what it takes to champion transformational change. We will also hear from Bill Smith, the CIO of Alaska, and Jim Weaver, the CIO of North Carolina. Full disclaimer, the content for today's session was recorded prior to the unfortunate events brought on by Hurricane Helene over the past week throughout communities in both Georgia and North Carolina. From all of us at PayIt, our thoughts and prayers are with those that were affected. I hope you find the session as insightful as I do. And now, over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Michelle. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're exploring the transformative progress that state and local governments are making in enhancing digital services. Residents are accessing government services online more often than ever before, but let's face it, the experience is not always as seamless and fulfilling as it should be. And government agencies are aware of this. In fact, according to the National Association of State CIO survey that ranks top 10 priorities for the state technology leaders every year, digital services are a major focus for state technology leaders this year and on. However, the path to digital transformation is not easy, and governments face challenges like outdated infrastructure, budget constraints, workforce demands, and more. And in today's session, we will explore those challenges, ways to overcome them, how to evolve technology landscape, and focus on some key areas, such as driving digital experience for residents, modernizing legacy applications, building resident trust, managing risk and identity, and many more. So to help drive today's discussion, I'm excited to introduce Jonathan Feldman, who is the CIO for Wake County, North Carolina. Prior to that, Jonathan served as the CIO of the city of Asheville. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Great to be here, Nadia. Excited to chat with you.
Fantastic. So to tee up today's discussion, let's start with the question of digital transformation. How would you assess the progress that the local governments are making within the area of digital transformation? So that's the question that we will explore after we play a video from an interview that we had with a CIO for North Carolina who kind of took a summary assessment of what digital transformation means for him. So let's watch that video and then come back and discuss it in detail.
Start by just first looking at what is digital transformation. So I define digital transformation as changing the paradigm. So we're focused on the other side of the table, the North Carolinian, the state's residents that's sitting there, and how do they wish and want to look at engaging government services. What I see too often is that we're focused on getting more services online, but we're not necessarily looking at how the constituent has to engage across multiple governmental agencies. So how do we make that journey a lot more easier for them? And so when I think about this, I think about the kind of the stool concept where you have broadband, you need connectivity, right? So we know that connectivity is an issue across the country, and it certainly is North Carolina, where we still have about 1.2 million households in North Carolina that as of 3 years ago did not have connectivity or access to high-speed internet. So you can't afford to leave them behind. We have to start talking about cyber. And with cyber, it's more or less identity access management. So how do we uniquely identify individuals in our state so they're able to transcend across all governmental platforms. Thirdly, is around privacy. And then the last thing is really around legacy modernization. We have a lot of back-end critical systems that are still not at the place where they need to be, so we can effectively leverage digital engagement with those systems. So we have a lot of work to do. In North Carolina, we are focusing at least on the front door and getting that common access platform where all residents can come through and engage for multiple governmental services. But we're probably, somewhere between, on a scale of 10, about 3 or 4 on our journey right now.
Jonathan, what's your take on this? And how do you see the conflict?
Counties are creatures of the state, so Jim is practically my boss. I have to agree with everything he said. I'm kidding. Actually, I think you nailed it. It's about the constituent experience, right? It's about how do we use technology to make sure that people can do things online instead of standing in line. It's and something else he said really stuck with me. That they have to like it. It has to work for them. And if you go to counties, cities across the nation, unfortunately, the number of them that do user experience testing with everything they roll out as public technology is vanishingly small. And in fact, there's not enough focus on this notion of public technology for the public. Now, NCDIT is doing a fabulous job rolling out broadband because he's right. You need 4 things to include people in the digital world. You need broadband, you need a device, you need to know how to use it, and it needs to be affordable by everyone. Otherwise, you're leaving people behind. So, right, it's not just about what kind of apps do we build, although it is about that. It's also about access and about information and how do people stay safe online? And do they know how to use the technology, right? The basics.
That's a great answer. And it sounds like there are some challenges to meeting those 4 criteria in general. And governments see those, whether it's legacy infrastructure, whether it's budget constraints to bring those new services and new apps and new service providers, right? How do you think about overcoming those challenges, whatever they might be in Wake County?
Sure. Well, you mentioned budget, and show me what you spend your money and time on, and I'll tell you what your priorities are, right? So the question isn't really one of technology. It's a question of what does the government unit want to get accomplished, right? And when the government unit wants more people to be online, as Wake County does, then we spent, we did a matching grant with the North Carolina Department of Information Technology. And we're building, in partnership with providers, a whole bunch of new fiber lines to unserved areas in Wake County. And Wake County is a pretty metro area, but we're lighting up in excess of 1,500 locations with one particular grant. And they never had fiber, right? The definition was unserved, right? So we're talking about dial-up. We're talking about really slow.
I love that take on accessibility, bringing something that didn't exist and rolling that out by providing the infrastructure to access the services that are out there. So you touched on the area of resident expectations and what people expect to see from governments because they're used to the Amazons of the world. They're used to here now and the seamless experience of 3 button clicks and getting to where they need to be, right?
Right.
In reality, sometimes the experience could be different. So to tee up this next section of our discussion, as far as what are the resident expectations, how are they evolving, let's play another clip and see what Bill Smith from Alaska has to say as far as how he sees the evolution of these digital expectations, and then we'll pick up our discussion here.
We're facing this with the context of the last several years where expectations from citizens and residents, they're really sky high in terms of digital engagement. And, whether it's through the pandemic, starting to kind of spur a lot of initiative for people being able to be reached at home and where they're at, or throughout just any kind of corporate America avenue, we've seen a lot of advances on the private sector side. And so I think that's causing a lot of expectations with our citizens, and rightfully so, for us to kind of keep pace. The good news is we've got a lot of tools today that we haven't had previously. As Jim mentioned, broadband expansion is a huge piece of it. Cybersecurity tools. There's been a huge focus on cybersecurity improvements and foundations across the states over the last several years. So that's kind of coming to where we need to. And then with the advance of artificial intelligence and natural language processing, we've got all the tools in place to really make a difference and to reach citizens where they're at. And so I think there's a whole lot of energy around the states. I know in Alaska, for a long time, we've had a single sign-on capability for our citizens to come to one place, we call it My Alaska, and to sign in, establish who they are, and then receive services. But we've been able to really advance some of the capabilities on that, and we're looking to take it even further, to Jim's point, reaching out to Alaskans and saying, what do you need from access? How do you want to engage with the state? And then we're going to be moving forward. We've reached a point in time where people expect the ability to jump on their phone and order groceries and they show up 30 minutes later. They expect to be able to interact with all manner of services across in their daily lives with their mobile devices and with electronic means. And so we're no different. And I think it's a great expectation to have, and I think it's a great challenge for us, and I think we're up to it. But being able to reach people where they're at on a daily basis, and they're there with their mobile devices, and so I think that is what's really exciting to me is we are starting to get to the place where we don't have to inconvenience citizens to go to a local office to achieve a service. And I think as we deliver on these increased capabilities, it's going to really revolutionize the way that people interact with government. And to Jim's point, hopefully it reduces the barriers so that they don't have to worry about, is this a state, a local, a federal service? This is just a governmental service that I need. How do I get it?
This is a post-COVID expectation, right? As we went into COVID, we've now shown the art of possible. We've demonstrated it. We've done it very successfully. And now there's that expectation that this will continue. And let's be honest, the workforce is not returning back into the brick and mortar buildings, or in some cases, not to the level it once did. So even for our ability for our employees to be able to support the public differently, we need to have these capabilities in place as well. So I think this is what you're seeing, is that evolution here now. This is going to become the normal course of action. It's not surprised to see digital transformation tied with cyber. I think cyber is table stakes anyway. I don't think it's even fair to have it on our top 10 list because it's always going to be there, right? But I think what you're seeing now across our community in the country here is that there is such a focus now on how we need to do things differently. Our agency leaders expect this differently. Our governors expect things to be done differently. And we're that mechanism to make that happen. And I think that's why you're seeing this renewed emphasis. And then to some of the comments Bill made earlier about the tools, the maturity of the tool sets that are now being made available that we can add into the toolbox to now enable these processes and services is light years from where we were 5 years ago.
So Jonathan, what do you have to say on that? I know it's a loaded question. Many things.
Oh, yeah. Listen, the beautiful thing about being in government, as opposed to being in surveillance capitalism, for lack of a better phrase, right, is that as artificial intelligence increases our efficiency, we can, instead of laying off all the humans, we can actually start to manage the workload much better in a way that our constituents, our community wants us to, right? Let me give you an example. When I was in Asheville, we collaborated with our development services department to put together a really neat wizard and walkthrough and permit access and all that. But here's the thing, Nadia, if you're a contractor, driving around your pickup truck, writing everything in pencil, right? You look at that and say, what is that? Right? And they were doing that. And so with the wisdom of the development services director at the time, they created sort of a permit facilitator role, somebody who sat there and said, oh, do you want me to walk you through that? And he or she didn't need to do that much, did it for the first couple of months of operation, and bam, it was fine. And then people were more comfortable doing it from home. But I think the beautiful thing about being in public service is that it is at its best human on human. Because how many times have you been on a phone tree and they're saying press 1 for this, press 2 for this, press 3 for this, and by the way, there's no 0 out, and you actually want something else, and you keep saying something else, operator, angrier and angrier, right? So I believe that what they were chatting about with advances in AI and whatnot, as we take off some of the rote work, a lot of the rote work, we're going to be able to really give the people in our community the service that they deserve and that they expect.
That's great. And then adding all of the functionality that is made available through others who are already doing it, say in the private sector, and capitalizing on that. That's the path forward.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you touched on the topic that everybody wants to talk about, and that, of course, the topic of AI, right? While we all know how to use generative AI, and we know that at the federal level, governments are using AI for certain, grants approvals and things of that nature. What are your thoughts on bringing AI to, say, the local level? How could it be utilized at the county level, if at all, today?
Sure. Well, we're doing one use case here at Wake County where we're using AI-powered transcription software to look at deeds from the 1800s, maybe even before that, I don't know, but certainly from the 1800s. And that handwriting is very different. And you actually have to train it. But once you train it, all of a sudden it can read it. And so we have some brilliant folks in our team that have made a study of this, and they've figured out what to do. And it's in support of a fantastic program that the Register of Deeds is running, called the Enslaved Persons Project, where they lift up that, hey, people actually used to be bought and sold, with title deeds and whatnot. And I think that's important in the same way that we preserve artifacts, say at the Holocaust Museum, because we want never again. The Register of Deeds is doing that for enslaved persons. And yes, it helps with genealogy, but it also helps sort of lift up what the truth was, even though it's a very difficult truth. And artificial intelligence is helping us transcribe those in a very easy to use way. And then it's just sticking it into the appropriate place in SharePoint, and then that's being made available on a web page. So it's really neat work. I think that local governments, I will tell you that we thought about deploying a chatbot early on in this. And because we really, our CISO is just a fabulous thinker, right? And she was guiding us and saying, hey, look, here's what could go wrong. I'm not saying let's not do this, but here's what could go wrong. And we had a really robust conversation about hallucination. We saw how that lawyer got in trouble for using citation data that just didn't exist. And when it came time, and we actually built a chatbot, right, to answer questions about our Unified Development Ordinance, which is this thick, right? It's just this gigantic document. And when we finally said, the risk benefit ratio is not there, right? The benefit could be there, but the moment it gives somebody bad information, and builders are usually the people looking up the UDO, right? Because they're developing. And the moment that somebody puts the wrong size house in the wrong size lot or whatever, and they spend $500,000 to do it, and then we tell them, no, you can't do that. That's against the UDO. we have a problem on our hands. All of that to say, right? I'm not, shaking my head and wagging my finger at the famous municipality that did do a chatbot that got it wrong. But what I am saying is we want to both not stick our head in the sand, right? And ignore AI, but nor do we want to be reckless about it. And so we've got guidelines that talk about, let's use public data when there's any doubt, right? In local government, we have open data, and then of course there's HIPAA and all that kind of stuff. So we try to use stuff that's already open when we're looking for use cases. But I think just stepping back and having that conversation about, what could go wrong, I think is very healthy. There's a lot of irrational exuberance in AI right now. I think Sam Altman bragged that it's the most capital intensive startup in history. And there's, tons of money being thrown at it. There's a question of environmental impact. There's a question of, will there be enough electricity left, for your refrigerator, right? If everyone's getting their questions answered on all the AI. So I think there are policy implications. And of course, I've talked to our policymakers about those kinds of things. But obviously it's a tool like any other, right? It's a knife. It can be used to slice a steak, or it can be used to attack someone. So we just want the tool to be the right tool to do the job, and we want to know what the risks are. So, things where it can hallucinate, I think we want to just stay away from. But places where there's a human in the loop, where it is vastly automating everything, is fantastic. We're looking at that for transcription. You still want somebody to proof it, but boy, if the computer does all the transcription, that is pretty powerful.
So it sounds like there's still a human behind the AI, right? Deciding the use case, and that's where you start.
Yes.
I love the use case that you described of what you guys are currently using AI for, bringing history to today's people and lifting those records that are hard to access and hard to understand. That's definitely thinking out of the box. That's the least likeliest case that I expected you would bring up, but it's amazing. Kudos to you for doing that.
That's good stuff. Yeah.
That's amazing. All right. Let's switch our focus to the type of government interactions that take place at the most granular level, and yet the most visible to the residents, the most tangible level, right? When people engage with their local governments through digital services, that one time when they need something, here they are not touching government for, say, many months out of the year. Finally, they need something. So that one experience becomes the focal point of what people think about local governments, right? So my question to you is this. When you roll out the new services to the residents, how do you ensure they understand what to expect out of those services? How do you ensure that they know how to get to where they need to be? And how do they navigate through the possible myriads of options of how to access these services?
Sure.
Make sure that, they like their government, that one interaction that they had actually was smooth.
Nadia, I believe that good IT needs at least some understanding of communications and marketing. And IT also needs to understand when to bring in the pros, right? We have a fabulous communications department at Wake County. And I feel so blessed. I feel so fortunate that they are able to, for example, for our digital inclusion project, help us with the outreach, help us figure out who are the stakeholders in the community. We're IT, we don't know that, right? And then help us put together everything from email blasts to print materials in the bookmarks for the libraries, right? People who go borrow books for free might also be interested in digital equity and inclusion. So, in a nutshell, it's just, you have to get really lucky and have a fabulous communications department, which we do. And I think, of course, it matters what you're doing, right? It's the scope of what you're doing. If I'm doing something internal for an ERP that's never going to touch anybody in the community, not a lot of, right? There's nothing to do. But if what I'm doing is switching out a utility billing portal, which I have done in my career, then it requires utility bill inserts and a communications campaign, potentially earned media, and that kind of thing. So, but the bottom line is communicate.
It's amazing you touched on the importance of communications and marketing as part of how to bring these services to the residents. Because I think in a lot of cases, those two pieces get lost in translation because we are all technology minded. Wouldn't technology do this for us, right? And at the end of the day, it's still the human element and having the right people in the right roles.
I mean, you can make the best technology in the world, but if no one knows about it or uses it, it's kind of a waste.
It's almost like that famous quote, right? If you build it, will they come? Mm-hmm. Will they come? We don't know because they need to know about it.
Right. And do you really want to roll the dice when you're spending, potentially millions of dollars of taxpayer money? Probably not, right?
Probably not. So when it comes to bringing this change, whether it's bringing new technology to the residents or new technology to the agency employees, right, that also have to familiarize themselves with how to do the same thing with new tools. How do you think about change management?
It's a must be. Right? And change management is not just, it's not just telling people that change is coming, right? It's also addressing what are their fears, what are their hopes. I think it's also being honest about what you can and can't do, right? There was one project that we were rolling out agency-wide, and what I didn't do is say, are you interested in this change, right? Because we were making the change. I had checked in with finance, with HR, with city management. We were making the change, and we were changing productivity suites, right? Which was a big lift because everybody every day uses their productivity suite. They want their spreadsheets, they want their slide decks, they want their email, they want their documents, right? So you change from one vendor to another, it's a gigantic change. So what we didn't want to ask was, are you okay with this, right? I mean, because we were doing it, right? So you don't ask the question you don't want the answer to. What we did ask, though, is what concerns you about this, right? What excites you about this? Do you want to talk to somebody about this? And all of those things we could do something about. So we did some marketing about the things that people were excited about. And then we also separately did some marketing surrounding the things that they were concerned about. I won't be able to do XYZ anymore. Good news. You will be able to do XYZ. Here's how you do it. And that was before the rollout ever happened. And that's the other aspect of change management is it's going to be bigger and it's going to be more than you possibly could think of. So starting it as early as possible, I think is always a good idea. I think that people can get wonkish about, we need to follow the ProSci ADCAR methodology and all that stuff. But fundamentally, it's just about addressing people's concerns, educating them, letting them control what they can control, and not being fake and offering them control over things that really aren't an option, right? Because no one likes a liar. Do you want to do this? No. Okay, we're doing it anyway. I mean, that's just a terrible human relationship when you do that. So it's just better not to ask those questions that, could put you in that situation.
It's impressive to me that you were hedging for twice the impact of what you thought would happen, because whatever you think might come back at you in terms of the unexpected reactions, you figured it's going to be double that. It's almost like that famous, when you want to remodel your house, you ask for a quote, and whatever you think is going to cost you, double it. Exactly.
Yes. No, that's great. I love that. Yeah.
That's awesome. So we have one last thing to touch upon, and this is the learnings of efficiency and how to bring these new things that we're managing, right, under change management, and possibly look at the private sector that has figured a thing or two out, and maybe we could borrow the learnings and bring them into the public sector. And to tee up this discussion, let's watch our last clip from, again, Bill Smith and Jim Weaver, and then we will talk about the things that we could learn from the private sector.
What we need from our partners, too, is to help us tell a story, right? Because we have to go secure the funding, and it's hard to go secure the funding when you're operating in 2-year increments, at least in our case in North Carolina's biennial budget, but most legislators look at 2-year windows. They're not looking at 3 to 5 year, 7-year strategic plans, and so they're going to tend to give you funding for a 2-year window. So what is the story we're telling? More importantly, then, how do we show transparency that we're progressing along those lines and then delivering the results that we said we would do? And I think our corporate partners can really help work with us on that communication and education across our respective general assemblies, so they understand, at the end of the day, we're serving their constituents, we're serving their voter. And how do we take the story from, this is Jim. Jim walks out of his house. He's connected via a wireless device. Jim just realized that his bus pass is out of money. He's right there, seamlessly working with local government. He's got his bus pass, but that reminded him now to go do X, Y, Z. And we can sit there, and so it relates back to something that's tangible to our legislative members, and I think that's where we get the traction. So we found that those partnerships where we can work collaboratively hand in hand with it's just the outcomes we generate are so much better than if it's just me trying to go sell it, or if it's just a partner trying to go sell something separately.
The sooner we can get that story out there, and the other thing that I need help from industry with is seeing the horizon, seeing what is out there from a technical perspective, what's coming down the road that will allow our leaders in government to serve Alaskans better. And then I can start telling that story, and I can start positioning it with our legislators, and I can start kind of working us down that path, setting the conditions so that as that new technology, that new capability starts to emerge, we've already seen where it can help within the state government. And the last thing I would just say with our private sector partners that I think to date, so, knock on wood, we've been pretty successful with up in Alaska, is really focus on that strategic relationship. There is not a really short timeline. There's not a quick, as we say in the military, a flash to bang on these relationships. It's got to be something that we are talking routinely and long term about. And what really has excited me since I've been in state government just these 4 or 5 years is that what I've seen on the private sector side is a real affinity for what I think is the best part of state government. They see that we're helping our friends and neighbors and our families. That's what we do. The blinky lights are great, but as I tell our staff, is that when you go home and you walk through your neighborhood and you're looking at your friends and your family, have you been able to benefit them, and have they benefited from what you've done with the state? And invariably the answer is yes. And we need to keep that front of mind. And what I love is that our private sector partners feel that same way.
I think that's a great point, Bill. We focus as well, especially with our IT staff, connect them to the mission of what's going on in the agency. And the more you understand that agency's business, the more influence you will gain, the more productivity that will be seen, and it's just a great outcome.
Jonathan, what's your take on that? Many things were mentioned. The roadmap, the options.
So much, yeah. Look, the key thing for me, and there are plenty of cautionary tales from the business world, right? Just like there are from government. I've worked for very large companies. I actually have a business degree, not a public administration degree. So there are plenty of cautionary tales, but probably the thing that we can take from the non-dysfunctional business world is customer first, right? And I think both of those folks were talking about that a little bit. The thing that I would add is for the customer experience to be fantastic, you've got to create a fantastic employee experience. And one of the reasons that I decided to join Wake County was they really impressed me with this employee well-being values that they have. You know, we've got core values. You know, of course, it's the usual integrity, working together, making things better, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But employee well-being is in there. And I believe that that is an engine for creating superior services for our constituents, right? The folks who live, work, play, and learn in Wake County are much better off when there are employees serving them who are not exhausted, who have flexibility in their jobs, who have reflection time, who are adequately compensated, who have good health care, because then they're not worried about that. They're focused on you, the person who lives, works, plays, learns in Wake County. And that's what we want. So for me, that's the biggest lesson. You know, the best businesses in the world, whether it's, it's debatable, right? But companies I admire are Patagonia, right? Companies I admire are, Apple's a great organization to work for, reportedly. There are other tech companies that I would not touch with a 10-foot pole, right? Because it's really dog eat dog, and eventually that catches up with you. Eventually, right? If you have enough capital, you can burn through it. You can get away with it for a while, but I don't think you can get away forever with that. In the same way that we create technical debt, sometimes we create like employee experience debt, and it will catch up with you. So,
I'm sitting here listening to you talk, and I think Wake County is really lucky to have you. And I mean that because the best business books I've ever read, going through all of the business schools, talked exactly about that, removing the obstacles from people focusing on their productivity so that everything else is taken care of. So don't worry about that. Just do what you're here to do day to day. Yeah. I admire that. Thank you for doing that.
Right. Listen, when you're worried about, not everyone's a parent, but if you're worried about your fur baby or you're worried about your, toddler, and that's always chipping away at you, right? And you can't focus. And what we want are focused employees, because they're the ones that do the best work.
And I think it's a great note to end on, and a great lesson for everybody who is watching this episode around the country. How do you make your experience for the residents the most stellar one? You start from the inside. You start from your organization and your employees. Yes. Thank you. That has been fantastic. Thank you so much for making time to join us today.
Thank you so much, Nadia. It was fun.